The sky wept on the day we buried Nathan. Heavy raindrops fell on the black umbrellas that dotted Oakwood Cemetery, as if the universe itself shared our grief. My son, my only son, was being lowered into the ground before my eyes, and with him, a part of me descended into that dark abyss as well. "Mom, you should sit down." Benjamin's voice sounded beside me, not my son, but my nephew, who had always looked after me like we were of the same blood since my husband died 15 years ago. "I'm fine," I replied automatically, though my legs trembled beneath my black dress. At 67, I still considered myself strong, but nothing in life prepared me for burying my child. Just a few yards away, Heather stood erect like a statue, her elegant figure standing out even in mourning. The black Chanel silk dress embraced her slender silhouette, the delicate veil partially covering her perfect face. I had never seen grief look so polished, so controlled. Not a single blonde hair out of place, not a smudge in her impeccable makeup. Even in sorrow, she maintained the flawless facade that had always made me feel dowdy and insufficient in comparison. Next to her, my grandchildren, William and Abigail, seemed lost in their formal dark clothes, their small faces pale with confusion and sadness. William, at 10, stood rigid and solemn, trying so hard to be the man of the family now. 7-year-old Abigail clutched a small bouquet of white lilies, her fingers gripping them so tightly that the stems were almost broken. When her eyes met mine across the grave, she made a small movement, as if she wanted to run into my arms, but Heather's firm hand on her shoulder kept her in place. The pastor spoke about Nathan's life, his success in business, his generosity, his love for family. Beautiful words that seemed empty in the face of the finality of that coffin. Nathan had only been 42 when the aneurysm took him. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call at 3 a.m. informing me that my son had collapsed during a late meeting and never woke up. As a retired teacher, the pastor continued, Judith Wilson instilled in her son the love of knowledge and the importance of perseverance that led him to build Wilson Tech Solutions, now valued at over $40 million. I almost laughed at the irony. Yes, I had taught Nathan the value of education, of hard work, of integrity. I had raised him alone after my husband's heart attack when Nathan was just 16. I had worked 2 jobs to put him through college. But now, standing here as his body was committed to the earth, none of that mattered. Success, wealth, status, all meaningless in the face of death's cruel finality. My eyes drifted to Heather again. Her face remained impassive, but there was something in her eyes, a cold calculation that seemed inappropriate for the moment. In the 10 years since Nathan had met her at a technology conference, I never really connected with my daughter-in-law. She had been pregnant with William within 3 months of meeting Nathan, their whirlwind romance culminating in a lavish wedding that seemed designed more for magazine spreads than for genuine celebration. Over the years, she was polite when necessary, but always maintained a carefully constructed distance between us. "Grandma," a small hand touched mine. William had approached silently, his eyes, so much like Nathan's, glistening with contained tears. "Is Dad really down there?" I swallowed the knot that had formed in my throat. "Just his body, dear. What made your father special, his love, his kindness, his intelligence, is in you and your sister now. Mom says we're moving to California," he whispered, anxiety creasing his young brow. "Are you coming with us?" The question struck me like a physical blow. California? This was the first I'd heard of any move. My apartment in Boston, the home I'd lived in for 30 years, was just a 20-minute drive from Nathan's Connecticut estate. I saw the children weekly, sometimes more. California would mean... Before I could answer, Heather appeared at our side, her expensive perfume penetrating the damp air. "William, go back to your place," she ordered, her voice controlled but firm. "This isn't the time to chat." Her eyes briefly met mine, a clear warning in them. Without a word, William obeyed, leaving me with an emptiness that seemed to expand with each moment. I watched him return to his position beside Abigail, his small shoulders squared with the effort of containing his emotions. The ceremony ended with a final hymn, voices embargoed by grief, trying to follow the somber melody. One by one, the attendees threw flowers onto the coffin. When my turn came, I dropped the white rose that Nathan always said was my trademark. I cultivated them in the small garden of my apartment. "Goodbye, my boy," I whispered, words that only the weeping clouds heard. At the reception after the funeral, held in the mansion that Nathan and Heather had purchased just 2 years before, I felt like a stranger. The guests, many of whom I didn't recognize, circulated with champagne flutes, discussing in low voices the future of the company, the testamentary succession, rumors about who would take control of Wilson Tech. "Did he leave specific instructions for you?" asked my old friend Dorothy, sitting beside me on a leather sofa in the least crowded corner of the room. "Nathan always said I would be taken care of," I replied, watching Heather circulate through the hall, accepting condolences with the grace of a first lady. "But honestly, Dorothy, I don't care about the money. I just want to ensure I'll continue to be part of William and Abigail's lives." Dorothy followed my gaze to the children, sitting silently on a bench by the window, watching the rain that continued to fall. "You know, Heather," she commented softly, "she's always been ambitious." Ambitious was a kind word for it. Shortly after meeting Nathan 10 years ago, Heather had become pregnant with William. Their whirlwind romance had surprised everyone, especially me. Nathan, always cautious and methodical, had suddenly married a woman he'd known for only 3 months. By the time Abigail came along 3 years later, I had hoped that motherhood might soften Heather's hard edges. It hadn't. "She's mentioned California to William," I said, my voice tight with worry. "Apparently they're moving." Dorothy's eyebrows shot up. "Without discussing it with you? That's exactly what I've come to expect," I finished for her. Before we could continue, the family attorney, Mr. Donovan, stepped onto a small, improvised podium and cleared his throat to get attention. A hush fell over the gathering. "At the request of Mrs. Pierce Wilson," he announced formally, referring to Heather, "the reading of the will shall take place now for the immediate family and executors. I ask that the other guests give us privacy by withdrawing to the adjacent hall." My heart began to race. This was unexpected. Typically, will readings weren't conducted at funeral receptions, but Heather had always been one to break with tradition when it suited her purposes. As the room emptied, leaving only about 10 people, including Heather, the children, Benjamin, and some company executives, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something in Heather's expression, a slight smile contained at the corners of her perfect mouth, that filled me with a dread I couldn't name. Mr. Donovan adjusted his glasses and opened a brown leather folder. "The last will and testament of Nathan James Wilson," he began, his voice steady despite the tension that had settled over the room. I sat stiffly in a leather armchair, hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. Across from me, Heather had positioned herself in what had been Nathan's chair, a massive, throne-like piece at the head of the room. William and Abigail sat on either side of her, looking small and lost. As Mr. Donovan began reading the formal legal preamble, I caught Heather watching me with an expression that sent ice through my veins. Anticipation, mixed with what could only be described as triumph. Something was terribly wrong. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was about to be revealed would change everything. And I was right. To my beloved wife, Heather Pierce Wilson, Mr. E. Donovan continued, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "I leave my entire estate, including but not limited to my shares in Wilson Tech Solutions, valued at approximately $42 million, our properties in Connecticut, Manhattan, and Aspen, all investments, accounts, and personal belongings." The words hit me like successive blows, each, entire and all, driving the air from my lungs more effectively than any physical attack could have. I gripped the arms of my chair, my knuckles whitening as I struggled to process what I was hearing. "Additionally," the lawyer continued, "Mrs. Pierce Wilson shall retain full custody and guardianship of our children, William and Abigail, with complete discretion over their upbringing, education, and place of residence." Complete discretion. The phrase echoed in my mind, its implications crystallizing with terrifying clarity. California. She could take them to California, or anywhere else, without consulting me, without any obligation to maintain my relationship with them. To my colleagues at Wilson Tech Solutions, I express my gratitude for your loyalty and dedication. The room began to swim before my eyes, the elegant furnishings blurring into indistinct shapes as I fought against the encroaching darkness at the edges of my vision. This couldn't be right. Nathan had always promised, had explicitly told me just months ago over dinner at my apartment, that I would be taken care of, that my relationship with the children would be protected. "Mom," Benjamin whispered, his hand warm on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" I nodded mechanically, though nothing was all right. Nothing would ever be all right again. First, the loss of my son, and now this, the potential loss of my grandchildren, the only remaining pieces of Nathan in this world. When Mr. Donovan finished reading the various charitable bequests and company directives, a heavy silence fell over the room. Then, hesitantly, I raised my hand like the school teacher I had been for 30 years. "Mr. Donovan," my voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and wavering. Was there no provision for me? The attorney glanced down at the documents, then back at me with genuine regret in his eyes. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Wilson. There is no specific bequest to you in this document." The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin's grip on my shoulder tightened protectively. "This is outrageous," he muttered. Nathan would never what?" Heather's voice cut through the room like a blade. She rose from her chair, a vision of elegant mourning, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. My husband clearly knew what he was doing. The will speaks for itself. She turned to me directly, her perfect features arranged in a facsimile of compassion that didn't reach her eyes. "Judith, I understand this must be disappointing for you. Perhaps Nathan assumed I would look after your needs voluntarily." "The children," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I only care about still being in their lives." Something hardened in Heather's expression. "About that," she said, her tone cooling measurably. "As Mr. Donovan just read, I have full discretion over the children's upbringing. We'll be relocating to California next month. Fresh start and all that." "But surely I can visit," I pressed, panic rising in my chest. "Or they could stay with me during school breaks." Nathan would have wanted— "What Nathan would have wanted," Heather interrupted sharply, "is clearly stated in his will. My children need stability now, not to be shuttled back and forth. Besides," she added, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper as she leaned closer to me, "your life ended with his, Judith. You're nothing to us now. Nothing." Gasps from around the room told me others had heard her vicious words. Benjamin stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to her that way?" Heather straightened, smoothing her dress with manicured hands. "I think this emotional outburst demonstrates exactly why the children need protection from destabilizing influences." She nodded to a security guard standing by the door. "Please escort Mrs. Wilson from the premises. She's clearly too distraught to remain." The security guard, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable with his assignment, took a hesitant step forward. "You can't do this," I protested, rising unsteadily to my feet. "William, Abigail." The children looked at me with wide, frightened eyes, but remained rooted beside their mother. William's face was a mask of confusion and distress, while tears began to stream down Abigail's cheeks. She made a small movement toward me, but Heather's hand clamped firmly on her shoulder once more. "This is still my house," Heather said coldly, "and you are no longer welcome in it." The humiliation burned as hot as the grief. To be ejected from my own son's funeral reception in front of colleagues and family friends, treated like an unwanted intruder rather than a grieving mother. "Wait," Mr. Donovan's voice cut through the chaos. He was still standing at the podium, but now he held up his hand, his expression grave. "There's one final section of the will that I have not yet read." Heather turned to him, irritation flashing across her perfect features. "What are you talking about? The will is concluded." "Not quite," Mr. Donovan replied, adjusting his glasses as he turned to the final page. "There is a final clause that Nathan added privately. 3 months before his death." The room went utterly still. Even the thunder outside seemed to pause in anticipation. "The clause reads as follows," Mr. Donovan continued, his voice stronger now. "In the event that my wife, Heather Pierce Wilson, should at any time attempt to separate my mother, Judith Wilson, from our children, or should she display contempt, cruelty, or disrespect toward my mother, this will shall be rendered null and void, and an alternate distribution shall take immediate effect." Heather's face froze in disbelief. "What? That's impossible. I was with him when he signed the will. There was no such clause." "As I said," Mr. Donovan replied calmly, "this was added privately, with myself and 2 partners at my firm as witnesses. Nathan specifically requested that this section remain sealed until the initial reading was complete. He turned the page and continued reading. Under such circumstances, the distribution shall be as follows. 80% of my entire estate shall pass directly to my mother, Judith Wilson, while 20% shall remain with Heather Pierce Wilson. Furthermore, joint custody of my children shall be legally established between my wife and my mother, with neither having the right to relocate the children without the other's express consent. The moment Mr. Donovan spoke my name, I saw Heather's hands begin to tremble violently, her face draining of all color. She clutched the back of Nathan's chair for support, her knuckles whitening against the dark leather. "This can't be legal," she whispered hoarsely. "I'll contest it." "You're welcome to try," Mr. Donovan replied, closing the folder with finality. "But I should inform you that Nathan recorded your comments here today, as well as several previous incidents. The specific condition has already been triggered by your own words and actions." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small digital recorder. "With witnesses present, you stated, and I quote, 'Your life ended with his, Judith. You're nothing to us now.' This constitutes clear disrespect and an explicit attempt to separate Mrs. Wilson from her grandchildren." Heather lunged toward Mr. Donovan, her composure completely shattered. "Give me that, you manipulative old fool!" Benjamin stepped between them, his tall frame blocking her path. "That's enough, Heather. Get out of my way." She attempted to push past him, her designer heels wobbling on the Persian rug. "This is my house, my inheritance." "Not anymore," Mr. Donovan stated calmly, retreating behind the mahogany desk where Nathan had spent countless late nights building his empire. "And technically, Mrs. Wilson, it was never entirely yours." Nathan anticipated this reaction. I remained frozen in my chair, the shock rendering me almost incapable of movement. 80% of Nathan's fortune, over $33 million, now belonged to me? Joint custody of the children? It seemed incomprehensible, like something from a daytime soap opera rather than my quiet, predictable life. Heather spun around, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You knew about this, didn't you? You and Nathan conspired behind my back." "I had no idea," I replied truthfully, finding my voice at last. "Nathan never told me." "Liar!" She was unraveling now, her perfect composure disintegrating with each passing second. "You've always hated me, always thought I wasn't good enough for your precious son." William had moved to stand protectively beside his sister, his young face tight with confusion and distress. "Mom, please stop shouting. You're scaring Abby." The sight of my grandson, so young yet trying so hard to be brave, broke through my paralysis. I rose from my chair and crossed to the children, kneeling before them despite the protest of my aging knees. "It's going to be all right," I promised, opening my arms. Abigail broke free from her mother's slackened grip and threw herself into my embrace, her small body shaking with sobs. William hesitated only a moment before joining us, his arms wrapping around both his sister and me. As I held my grandchildren, Nathan's children, I looked over their heads at Heather. Her carefully constructed world had just imploded, leaving her standing amid the ruins of her plans and pretenses. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely vulnerable, shocked, frightened, and utterly lost. In that moment, despite everything, I felt a flicker of pity for her. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her cruel words and the knowledge of what she had intended for me. A life without the children, without any connection to the family I loved. "We have much to discuss," Mr. Donovan said, breaking the charged silence. "Perhaps it would be best if the children were taken somewhere more peaceful while we address the details." As the nanny led William and Abigail from the room, their reluctant glances back at me filled with confusion and hope, I straightened my shoulders and prepared to face whatever came next. Nathan, my brilliant, prescient son, had somehow anticipated this exact scenario and protected me from beyond the grave. Now it was my turn to be strong, for him, for the children, and for myself. The study door closed behind the children with a soft click that seemed to punctuate the moment, dividing my life into clear, before, and after. Benjamin remained protectively at my side while Heather paced the room like a caged animal, her composure completely shattered. "I want to see the document," she demanded, raking perfectly manicured fingers through her hair, disrupting its careful arrangement. I want to see this supposed secret clause with my own eyes. Mr. Donovan nodded, sliding the papers across the polished mahogany desk. By all means. Heather snatched them up, her eyes darting frantically across the pages. I watched as her expression shifted from disbelief to horror to a cold fury that transformed her beautiful features into something almost unrecognizable. This is Nathan's signature, she conceded finally, her voice tight. But it doesn't matter. I'll contest it. No court will uphold a secret codicil designed to entrap me. I wouldn't be so certain, Mr. Donovan replied, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to her frenzy. Nathan was very thorough. Not only did he record multiple instances of your stated intentions regarding his mother, but he also documented your communications with real estate agents in California, dating back 6 months. Communications you deliberately concealed from him, I might add. Heather's head snapped up. He was spying on me? He was protecting his family, Mr. Donovan corrected. All of his family, including his mother. There's more you should see, he continued, opening his laptop and turning it to face us. Nathan recorded this video statement to accompany the revised will. My heart constricted painfully as Nathan's face appeared on the screen, healthy, vibrant, his blue eyes serious but clear, recorded just months before the aneurysm would claim his life. I reached out involuntarily, my fingers hovering just above the screen as if I could somehow touch him across the barrier of time and death. If you're watching this, Nathan began, his voice steady, then something has happened to me, and certain events have transpired at the reading of my will. Heather sank into a chair, her eyes fixed on her husband's image. Heather, Nathan continued, addressing her directly. If you're seeing this, it means you've done exactly what I feared you might do. You've attempted to cut my mother out of our children's lives. I've watched how you've subtly pushed her away over the years, making excuses for missed visits, scheduling conflicts with family events, belittling her opinions on child-rearing. Each word struck like a physical blow, not just to Heather, but to me as well. I had noticed these patterns, but had always doubted myself, wondering if I was being overly sensitive or imagining slights that weren't there. To hear Nathan confirm that it had been deliberate, systematic, it validated years of hurt while simultaneously breaking my heart that he had seen it happening and never confronted it directly. I've recorded numerous instances, Nathan continued, including conversations in which you explicitly stated your intention to finally be free of her meddling once you had control of the estate. I had hoped you would prove me wrong. I had hoped that, in the event of my death, grief might soften your heart. Clearly, I was mistaken. Heather's face had gone ashen. Turn it off, she whispered. Mr. Donovan ignored her. Mom. Nathan turned his gaze slightly, as though looking directly at me. I know this must be overwhelming for you. You never cared about money or status, only family. That's why I'm entrusting you with the bulk of my estate. Not because I think you want it, but because I know you'll use it to protect what matters most. William and Abigail. Tears blurred my vision. Even from beyond the grave, my son understood me perfectly. The terms are simple, Nathan continued. 80% of everything I own now belongs to my mother. The remaining 20% goes to Heather. Joint custody of the children is non-negotiable. If Heather contests this, additional documentation will be submitted to the court demonstrating her unfitness as the sole guardian. This includes evidence of her affair with Jeffrey Simmons, CFO of Rival Tech, which began 6 months ago. Heather made a strangled sound. How did he? I've known for months, Nathan said, answering her unfinished question. I hired a private investigator when I first suspected. The evidence is comprehensive and would be deeply embarrassing for you professionally and personally if made public. I suggest you accept the terms of the revised will without contest. An affair. The revelation struck me with surprising force. I had never imagined Heather capable of such betrayal. Her carefully cultivated image as the perfect wife and mother, her apparent devotion to Nathan, all a facade concealing secrets and deceptions I couldn't have fathomed. The video continued for several more minutes, with Nathan outlining specific provisions for the children's education and care. When it finally ended, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder outside. Mr. Donovan closed the laptop. There are copies of all documentation, including the video, in secure locations. Nathan was very thorough. I looked at Heather, expecting more rage, more threats. Instead, I found her staring vacantly at the dark computer screen, all fight suddenly drained from her body. For the first time, I saw her not as the polished, calculating woman who had always intimidated me, but as someone broken, a woman who had gambled everything and lost. "What happens now?" Benjamin asked, breaking the silence. "Now," Mr. Donovan replied, gathering his papers, "the assets will be transferred according to the revised will. I suggest both Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Pierce Wilson retain separate counsel to navigate the details of the joint custody arrangement." I rose from my chair on unsteady legs, still processing the enormity of what had just occurred. In a single afternoon, I had lost my son, nearly lost my grandchildren, and become a multimillionaire. None of it seemed real. "Heather," I said quietly, approaching her chair, "regardless of what's happened, we both love those children. For their sake, we need to find a way forward." She looked up at me, her mascara smudged beneath eyes that now held something I'd never seen there before. "Defeat. You've won, Judith," she said flatly. "What more do you want from me?" "This isn't about winning," I replied. "It's about what Nathan wanted, for his children to have both of us in their lives." She laughed bitterly. "Always so noble. No wonder Nathan adored you. The perfect mother, the perfect moral compass." Her voice dripped with resentment. "Do you have any idea what it's like to compete with a saint? To know that no matter what I did, I'd never measure up to the woman who raised him?" The raw honesty of her words caught me off guard. In all our years of carefully maintained civility, this was the first genuine emotion she had ever shown me. "I never saw it as a competition," I said softly. "Of course you didn't. You didn't have to." She turned away, shoulders sagging. "Just go, take your victory and go. We'll have our lawyers sort out the details." As I moved toward the door, intending to find William and Abigail, Heather's voice stopped me. "He was working too hard," she said suddenly. "Those last few months, something was wrong, but he wouldn't talk about it. Did he say anything to you? About his health?" I turned back, surprised by the question. "No. He seemed fine when I saw him at Sunday dinner 2 weeks before it happened." She nodded slowly, as if confirming something to herself. "He kept secrets from both of us, it seems." There was something in her tone, a hint of knowledge or suspicion beyond what had been revealed. That made me wonder what else Nathan might have concealed from us both. But before I could question her further, the door opened and William appeared, his young face solemn. "Grandma, can we go home with you tonight?" he asked, his voice small but determined. "Abby keeps crying, and she says she wants to stay with you." Home. The word hung in the air between us. My modest 2-bedroom apartment was hardly equipped for 2 children. But the need in William's eyes, the silent plea for stability amid the chaos that had engulfed their world, made such practical concerns seem trivial. "Of course you can, sweetheart," I assured him. "If your mother agrees." We both looked to Heather, who remained slumped in her chair, defeat written in every line of her body. "Fine," she muttered, not meeting our eyes. "Take them. I need time to think." As I left the study with William's hand firmly in mine, I glanced back once more at Heather. Despite everything, her cruelty, her deception, her plans to separate me from my grandchildren, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of compassion for her. She had lost her husband, her financial security, and now, temporarily at least, her children. But any sympathy was tempered by the knowledge of what she had intended for me: a life of isolation, cut off from the only family I had left. Nathan had seen through her machinations and protected me from beyond the grave. Now it was my responsibility to honor his faith in me, to become not just the grandmother his children needed, but a guardian of their future and his legacy. As we stepped into the hallway where Abigail waited with her small suitcase already packed, I squared my shoulders against the weight of all that had changed. The grief of losing Nathan remained a hollow ache in my chest, but alongside it grew a newfound resolve. Whatever came next, I would face it with the strength Nathan had always believed I possessed. The next morning dawned gray and dreary, matching my exhausted state after a night of fitful sleep punctuated by Abigail's nightmares. My apartment, normally so familiar and comforting, felt strange with the addition of 2 small occupants who had transformed my orderly space overnight. William was curled on my sofa bed, finally sleeping soundly after hours of quiet vigilance over his sister. Abigail had eventually settled in my bed, her tear-stained face peaceful at last, her small hand clutching the stuffed rabbit I'd pulled from a storage box, a toy that had once belonged to Nathan. I moved quietly to the kitchen, mindful of not waking them. As I prepared coffee, my hands trembled slightly, the events of yesterday still surreal in the morning light. Nathan was gone. I was suddenly wealthy beyond imagination, and I now shared custody of 2 traumatized children whose mother might fight me for every inch of ground. The phone rang, startling me. I answered quickly before it could wake the children. "Mrs. Wilson?" A woman's clipped, professional voice greeted me. "This is Amanda Hayes from Donovan and Associates. Mr. Donovan asked me to call and set up a meeting with you this morning to begin the asset transfer process. Would 10 a.m. work for you?" The practicalities crashed in. Asset transfer, legal documents, financial decisions I had no experience making. "The children," I began, glancing toward the living room. "I don't have anyone to—" Mr. Donovan anticipated that concern. Ms. Hayes interrupted smoothly. "We've arranged for Mrs. Peterson, the children's regular nanny, to meet you at your apartment at 9:30 if that's acceptable. She can stay with them while you attend the meeting." Nathan's thoroughness extended even beyond the grave, it seemed. "Yes, that would be fine. Thank you." After hanging up, I stood motionless in the middle of my kitchen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of change sweeping through my life. Just 3 days ago, I had been a retired English teacher living on a modest pension, my greatest concerns being which books to recommend to my reading group and whether my roses would survive an early frost. Now, "Grandma?" William's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, looking younger than his 10 years. "Is there breakfast?" The simple, practical question grounded me. Children needed routine, needed normalcy, especially amid chaos. "Of course, sweetheart. How about pancakes? Your father always loved my blueberry pancakes when he was your age." His face brightened slightly. "With extra blueberries?" "Absolutely." As I gathered ingredients, William perched on a stool at my small kitchen island, watching with the intense focus that reminded me so much of Nathan as a boy. "Are we going to live with you now?" he asked suddenly, his voice carefully neutral in that way children have when they're trying to be brave. I measured flour, buying time to formulate an answer that wouldn't add to his uncertainty. "Not exactly. Your father arranged for us to share time with you, your mother and me, so you'll spend some time at her house and some time here with me. But we're not moving to California." "No," I assured him, remembering the explicit terms of the will. "Not unless both your mother and I agree it would be best for you, which I don't think will happen." He nodded, absorbing this. "Dad knew Mom was going to try to take us away from you, didn't he? That's why he made that special part of the will." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. "Your father wanted to make sure you and Abigail would have both of us in your lives. Even though Mom and you don't like each other?" I nearly dropped the mixing bowl. "William, what makes you say that?" He gave me a look far too knowing for his years. "Mom always gets that tight smile when you visit. And she makes those comments after you leave, about your clothes, or your apartment, or how you interfere with our schedule." My heart sank. I'd always been careful never to speak negatively about Heather in front of the children, assuming she extended the same courtesy to me. Clearly, I'd been mistaken. "Sometimes adults have complicated relationships," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean we don't both love you very much." Before he could respond, a sleepy-eyed Abigail wandered in, clutching the stuffed rabbit. "I smell pancakes." The moment for difficult truths passed as I turned my attention to feeding my grandchildren, establishing a semblance of normalcy in a world turned upside down. Mrs. Peterson arrived precisely at 9:30, a competent, kind-faced woman in her 50s who greeted the children with genuine warmth. She brought fresh clothes and toiletries for them, packed hastily from their rooms at the main house. "Mrs. Pierce Wilson asked me to give you this," she said quietly, handing me an envelope once the children were occupied with their backpacks. Inside was a brief typed note. "I've instructed Mrs. Peterson to stay with the children at your apartment until we reach a more permanent arrangement. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow. Do not attempt to contact me directly. Heather." No mention of when she wanted to see her children. No inquiry about their well-being after the traumatic events of yesterday. The coldness of it chilled me. "Has she asked about the children?" I questioned Mrs. Peterson softly. A flicker of something, disapproval, perhaps, crossed the nanny's face. She asked if they were safe and adequately accommodated. I assured her they were. The stark inadequacy of Heather's concern angered me more than her previous day's cruelty. These were her children, children who had just lost their father and witnessed their mother's public unraveling. They deserved more than clinical inquiries about their physical safety. With reluctance, I left them in Mrs. Peterson's capable hands and took a taxi to the offices of Donovan and Associates, my mind swimming with questions and concerns. The law offices occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown building. The decor, speaking of old money and established power. Mr. Donovan greeted me personally, ushering me into a conference room where 3 other people awaited, a financial advisor, an accountant, and another attorney specializing in estate law. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Donovan began once introductions were complete. I know this is overwhelming, but we need to move quickly to secure the assets before Mrs. Pierce Wilson can attempt to access or move them. Has she tried? I asked, alarmed by the urgency in his tone. She called the company's CFO at 6 a.m. today, attempting to authorize a wire transfer of $5 million to a private account, he confirmed grimly. Fortunately, he had already been notified of the will's provisions and declined the transaction. The desperate move surprised me. Was Heather attempting to hide assets, or was she simply securing what she saw as her fair share before it could be taken from her? What do you need from me? I asked, straightening in my chair. For the next 2 hours, I signed documents, provided identification, created new accounts, and authorized changes that made my head spin. The numbers involved seemed abstract, unreal. Millions in liquid assets, property values, stock options, intellectual property rights. Nathan's fortune, painstakingly built over years of innovation and strategic investment, now substantially mine to manage. The most pressing concern, said Melissa Kang, the sharp-eyed financial advisor, is Wilson Tech Solutions itself. You now own 80% of a company valued at over $40 million, but you know nothing about running it. We need to establish your role and authority immediately before the board attempts to seize control in the power vacuum. I don't want to run the company, I protested. I'm a retired English teacher, not a tech executive. No one expects you to develop software or make technical decisions, Mr. Donovan assured me. But as majority shareholder, you need to establish clear oversight to protect your interests and Nathan's legacy. As they outlined options for management structures and board representation, a strange clarity began to emerge through my fog of grief and confusion. Nathan hadn't just left me money, he'd left me responsibility. For his children, yes, but also for the company he'd built, the employees who depended on it, the innovations he'd believed in. I want to understand everything, I said suddenly, interrupting a technical explanation of voting shares. Not just sign where you tell me to sign. I need to understand what Nathan built, how it works, what's at stake. Surprise registered on their faces, quickly replaced by something that looked like respect. That will take time, Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Donovan said carefully. Then we'd better get started, I replied, with a firmness that surprised even me. Nathan believed I could handle this. I won't prove him wrong. As the meeting continued with renewed focus and depth, I felt something stirring within me, a strength I hadn't known I possessed, awakening just when it was most needed. The meek, accommodating woman who had stood silently in the rain at her son's funeral yesterday was gone, replaced by someone new, someone who had promises to keep and battles to fight, for Nathan, for William and Abigail, and perhaps finally, for myself. Grandma, is this really going to be our new house? Abigail's eyes were wide as she twirled in the center of the spacious living room, her small feet sliding on the polished hardwood floors. 2 weeks had passed since the funeral. 2 weeks of dizzying changes and difficult decisions. It's one option, I replied carefully, watching as William methodically explored the room, examining built-in bookshelves and testing window latches with his father's analytical attention to detail. What do you think? The colonial-style house sat on 3 acres just 15 minutes from the children's school, its gracious proportions and classic architecture a stark contrast to my modest apartment, but less ostentatious than the modernist mansion Heather had chosen with Nathan. Most importantly, it was only 10 minutes from the main house, making transitions between our homes as seamless as possible for the children. It has good bones, William declared, echoing a phrase Nathan had often used when evaluating properties. And the backyard is big enough for a proper treehouse. "I want my room to be purple," Abigail announced, having already claimed the bedroom with the window seat overlooking the garden, with stars on the ceiling like at home. Home. The word hung in the air between us. These past 2 weeks, my apartment had served as a temporary sanctuary, but its cramped quarters and urban setting were ill-suited for 2 active children accustomed to space and privilege. Yet buying this house, committing to this new reality where I was not just a visiting grandmother, but a primary caregiver with joint custody, felt momentous. "We'll see," I hedged, not wanting to make promises I couldn't keep. The purchase agreement was already drawn up, the financing approved thanks to my newly acquired wealth, but caution had become my watchword since the day my world had turned upside down. My phone vibrated with a text from Benjamin, who was waiting outside with the real estate agent. "Heather just pulled up. Looks like she got your message." My heart rate quickened. I had invited Heather to view the house before I made an offer, a gesture of collaboration that my attorney had advised against, but that felt necessary for the fragile peace we were attempting to build. "Children," I called, keeping my voice deliberately light. "Your mother is here. Why don't you show her your favorite parts of the house?" They raced to the front door just as Heather entered, immaculate as always in a cream pantsuit that emphasized her slender frame. These past weeks had left no visible mark on her, no shadows under her eyes, no strain around her mouth to suggest the legal battles and financial negotiations that had consumed our days. "Mom!" Abigail launched herself forward, wrapping arms around Heather's waist. William followed more sedately, his greeting reserved but genuine. Something flickered across Heather's perfect features as she embraced her children. Relief, perhaps, or a softening I rarely witnessed in her. Then her eyes met mine over Abigail's head, and the familiar coolness returned. "This is nice," she said, her gaze sweeping the entrance hall with practiced assessment. "Traditional, safe, very you." I had learned to recognize the subtle barbs beneath her seemingly neutral comments. Very you meant predictable, unimaginative, old-fashioned, but I let it pass, unwilling to create tension in front of the children. "The school bus stops at the corner," I offered instead, "and there's a finished basement that would make a perfect play area for rainy days." As the children dragged Heather from room to room, excitedly pointing out features that had captured their imagination, I watched her carefully. Despite the civil front we maintained during exchanges of the children, this was our first substantive interaction since the will reading. The legal teams had handled everything else, creating an initial custody schedule that split weekdays evenly and alternated weekends. When the children disappeared upstairs to explore once more, Heather turned to me, her voice low and controlled. "You don't need to do this, you know. The Connecticut house has plenty of room. The children could stay there with me, and you could visit whenever you wanted." The offer, framed as generosity, was actually a play for control, an attempt to relegate me back to the role of visiting grandmother rather than equal guardian. "Nathan wanted joint custody," I replied simply. "That means 2 homes, 2 equal sets of rights and responsibilities." Her perfect jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is that what all this is about? Following Nathan's wishes to the letter? Playing the devoted mother even in his death?" The accusation stung, partly because it contained a grain of truth. I had spent my life trying to be what Nathan needed. First as a single mother determined to give him every opportunity, then as the supportive background figure in his adult success. But this was different. "This is about William and Abigail," I said quietly. "About giving them stability and consistency after losing their father." "And the company," she countered, "is taking over Wilson Tech also about the children? Or is it about proving something?" News of my activities at Wilson Tech had clearly reached her. In the past 2 weeks, I had met with the executive team, toured the facilities, and begun intensive education on the company's products and market position. I had not made any dramatic changes yet, but my presence and the power I now wielded as majority shareholder had sent ripples through the corporate structure. "The company is Nathan's legacy," I replied. "I'm learning what I need to know to protect it. For someone who claimed not to care about money, you've certainly embraced your new wealth quickly," she observed, her tone deliberately casual as she examined an intricate molding along the ceiling. "The house, the company oversight, the private financial advisors, it suits you better than I would have expected." The subtle attempt to shame me for using the resources Nathan had left me was transparent but effective. I felt a flush rise to my cheeks, a lifetime of frugality and modest living making me momentarily defensive about my recent decisions. But then I remembered Mr. Donovan's words during one of our many meetings. Nathan didn't leave you wealth as a luxury, Mrs. Wilson. He left it as a tool, a means to protect what mattered to him. Nathan trusted me, I said, meeting her gaze directly. With his children and with his company, I won't apologize for honoring that trust. Something shifted in her expression, a flash of respect perhaps, or simply surprise at my directness. Before she could respond, the children thundered back down the stairs. "Mom, there's a secret passage between two of the bedrooms," William exclaimed, his typical reserve forgotten in excitement. "Well, not really secret. It's a shared bathroom with doors on both sides, but Abby and I could use it to visit each other after bedtime." "Is this going to be our house when we're with Grandma?" Abigail asked, looking between us with the uncanny perception children often display during parental conflicts. Heather hesitated, her perfectly manicured hands smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her slacks. Then, with what seemed like genuine effort, she softened her voice. "It seems Grandma has found a lovely place for you to stay when you're with her. If she decides to buy it, I'm sure you'll be very comfortable here." The concession, small but significant, surprised me. It was the first time since Nathan's death that she had acknowledged, without legal pressure, my permanent role in the children's lives. "Thank you," I said quietly. She nodded once, briskly. "The children need to come home with me now. They have a piano lesson at 4. Home, still defined as her space, not mine, but progress nonetheless." As they prepared to leave, William approached me with a folded piece of paper. "I drew the treehouse I want to build," he said, pressing it into my hand. "For when we move in." The simple act of faith, his certainty that this house would become our shared home, cemented my decision. Whatever complications lay ahead with Heather, with the company, with the massive changes in my life, the children needed this stability, needed me to be not just their grandmother, but their guardian, their advocate, their safe harbor in the storm that had claimed their father and transformed their mother. "I'll call the real estate agent tomorrow," I promised, tucking the drawing into my pocket like the treasure it was. As I watched them drive away, Benjamin joined me on the porch. "So, are you going to make an offer?" "Yes," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "It's time to stop reacting and start building something new." For the first time since Nathan's funeral, I felt not just pushed by circumstances, but pulled by purpose, by a vision of what could be rather than what had been lost. Heather would continue to challenge me. The company would demand more than I had ever imagined giving, and grief would remain my constant companion. But standing on the porch of what would soon be my new home, I glimpsed the path forward. Not the quiet, contained life I had expected in my retirement, but something richer and more demanding. A second act I had never anticipated, but now embraced with growing resolve. 1 month after Nathan's death, I found myself seated at the head of a gleaming conference table in the Wilson Tech Solutions headquarters, surrounded by men and women in expensive suits who regarded me with barely concealed skepticism. As majority shareholder, I had called this board meeting to address growing concerns about the company's direction, concerns that had emerged during my crash course in corporate governance and financial analysis. "Mrs. Wilson," began James Latimer, the interim CEO who had stepped into Nathan's role, "while we appreciate your interest in the company, I must emphasize that the technical aspects of our business require specialized knowledge that I don't possess," I finished for him, my teacher's voice carrying clearly despite its soft tone. "Yes, Mr. Latimer, you've made that point in our previous 3 meetings. What you haven't explained is why the Phoenix platform, the project my son described as the future of the company, is experiencing developmental delays that weren't disclosed to shareholders." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Melissa Kang, the financial advisor Nathan's attorney had recommended, gave me an approving nod from her position at my right hand. We had spent hours preparing for this confrontation, reviewing technical reports and financial projections that painted a concerning picture of the company's flagship product. "Development timelines in AI are notoriously unpredictable," Latimer responded smoothly. Nathan understood this reality. "Did he also understand that the neural network architecture has fundamental flaws that your team identified 6 months ago?" I asked, sliding copies of an internal report across the table, or that research funding was redirected to executive compensation packages while these problems remained unsolved. The silence that followed was deafening. I had spent my career reading rooms full of reluctant students. This group was no different. Some shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, while others maintained poker faces that couldn't quite hide their surprise at my level of preparation. "Where did you get this report?" demanded Latimer, his composure cracking slightly. "From the company servers," replied Melissa. "Mrs. Wilson has full access rights as majority shareholder. The better question is why this information wasn't included in the materials provided to the board." As the discussion escalated into technical debates and financial justifications, I observed the dynamics around the table with the practiced eye of someone who had managed classroom politics for 30 years. Alliances became clear. Some board members appeared genuinely shocked by the revelations, while others subtly aligned with Latimer through body language and supportive interjections. Most interesting was Dr. Anita Sharma, the head of research and development, who remained silent throughout the heated exchange, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. When the arguments reached a natural lull, I addressed her directly. "Dr. Sharma, as the person most familiar with the Phoenix platform, what's your assessment of the current situation?" All eyes turned to the distinguished woman at the far end of the table. She adjusted her glasses with deliberate care, buying time to formulate her response. "The Phoenix platform has significant potential," she began cautiously. "Nathan's vision was revolutionary, using artificial intelligence to create adaptive learning systems that respond to individual cognitive patterns. But the current implementation has structural problems that weren't adequately addressed before we committed to market timelines. Could they be fixed?" I pressed. "With sufficient resources and realistic timelines, yes," she replied. "But not within the quarter as we've been promising investors." Latimer's face flushed with anger. "This is precisely the kind of technical discussion that should happen in appropriate channels, not in a board meeting with—" He hesitated, clearly reconsidering his word choice. "Non-technical participants." The dismissive tone was familiar, the same condescension I had encountered throughout my life when men underestimated me based on my gender, my age, or my profession. But where I might once have retreated, I now leaned forward. "Mr. Latimer, I may not understand the intricacies of neural network architecture, but I recognize obfuscation when I hear it. This company, my son's legacy, is facing a critical juncture. We can either acknowledge the problems honestly and address them properly, or we can continue pretending everything is fine until the inevitable failure destroys not just the Phoenix platform, but potentially the entire company." My voice remained steady, but I infused it with the quiet authority I had developed over decades of commanding classrooms. "I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the current executive leadership." The bold move, planned with Melissa but still terrifying to execute, sent shockwaves through the room. Board members exchanged alarmed glances. Someone actually gasped. "This is absurd," Latimer sputtered. "You can't just walk in here after a month and—" "I own 80% of this company," I interrupted calmly. "I can indeed call for this vote, and according to the bylaws Nathan established, I can do so effective immediately." What followed was 3 hours of intense debate, legal consultations, and increasingly desperate counterarguments from Latimer's supporters. By late afternoon, exhausted but resolute, I had achieved what I came for. Latimer and 2 other executives were removed. Dr. Sharma was appointed interim CTO, and a search committee was established to find a new CEO who would prioritize product integrity over market promises. As the board members filed out, some shell-shocked, others quietly supportive, Dr. Sharma approached me. "Nathan would be proud," she said simply. "He always said you were stronger than anyone knew." The validation, from someone who had worked closely with my son, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'm just trying to protect what he built." "It's more than that," she replied. "You're showing the same courage he did when he founded this company, choosing the harder right over the easier wrong." I gathered my papers, emotionally and physically drained from the confrontation, but also experiencing a curious sense of accomplishment. "Will you help me understand the technical challenges? I need to know what we're facing if I'm going to continue making these kinds of decisions." "Of course," she agreed readily. "Nathan always said you were a quick study. The mention of Nathan, these casual remembrances from people who had known different facets of him than I had, both pained and comforted me. Each new story was a fresh connection to him, even as it underscored his absence. My driver was waiting when I emerged from the building into the fading afternoon light. I checked my watch, calculating whether I would make it home before William and Abigail returned from their day with Heather. The custody schedule we had established divided weekdays between us, with transitions occurring at 6 p.m., a routine that provided stability for the children while minimizing direct interaction between Heather and me. But as I settled into the back seat, my phone rang, Heather's number appearing on the screen. My stomach tightened instinctively. She rarely called directly, preferring to communicate through texts or, when necessary, through the children's nanny. "Hello, Heather," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "I just received a very interesting call," she began without preamble, her tone sharp with anger. "Apparently, you staged quite the coup at Wilson Tech today." News traveled fast in corporate circles. I made necessary changes to address serious concerns about the company's direction. "Without consulting me?" The indignation in her voice was palpable. "I may only own 20%, Judith, but that's still a significant stake. I have a right to be involved in major decisions." The demand caught me off guard. Since the will reading, Heather had shown no interest in the company beyond ensuring her financial stake was secure. She had focused instead on maintaining her social standing, carefully crafting a public narrative about Nathan's death and the amicable arrangement regarding the children that bore little resemblance to reality. "You've never expressed interest in the company's operations before," I pointed out. "In fact, you've missed the last 3 shareholder briefings, because they were scheduled during my time with the children," she countered. "A deliberate choice on your part, I suspect." The accusation stung, partly because it contained a grain of truth. I hadn't intentionally scheduled meetings to exclude her, but I hadn't gone out of my way to accommodate her schedule either. "What is it you want, Heather?" I asked directly, fatigue making me less diplomatic than usual. A brief silence followed. Then, "I want a seat on the board, and a role in the company that reflects my position as Nathan's widow and a significant shareholder." The request, or demand, surprised me. "You have no background in technology or business management," I reminded her. "What exactly would you contribute to board discussions?" "I was married to Nathan for 10 years, she replied, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I listened to him talk about this company every day. I attended every corporate function, cultivated relationships with investors and partners. I understand the human side of this business better than you ever will." There was truth in this that I couldn't deny. While I had been the distant, supportive mother, Heather had been immersed in Nathan's professional world, witnessing its politics and personalities firsthand. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "But I need to know your real motivation. Is this about protecting your financial interests, or is there something more?" Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. "This is the last piece of Nathan I have left. You have the children most of the time now. You have his mother's legacy. You even moved into a house that looks like the one he grew up in. I need something that connects me to him too." The raw honesty caught me off guard. Beneath the polished exterior and calculated maneuvers, Heather was grieving too, mourning not just Nathan, but the life and identity she had built as his wife. "Come to the house tonight when you drop off the children," I suggested, making a decision I hoped I wouldn't regret. "We should discuss this in person." As I hung up, I wondered if I was making a strategic error or opening a door to a more productive relationship with the woman who would always be connected to me through Nathan's children. Either way, the confrontation in the boardroom had been merely the first of the day's battles. The second awaited me at home, where the personal and professional spheres of my new life would collide in ways I could scarcely predict. The autumn evening had turned cool by the time Heather's sleek Mercedes pulled into my newly paved driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as she helped the children gather their backpacks and jackets, her movements efficient, but not hurried. She had always been physically affectionate with William and Abigail in a carefully curated way, smoothing hair, straightening collars, gestures that combined care with correction. William spotted me through the window and waved, his reserved smile warming as I returned the greeting. The past month had brought subtle changes in both children. William had become more openly affectionate, as if freed from some unspoken constraint, while Abigail had developed a shadow of anxiety that manifested in small ways, nail-biting, nightmares, a reluctance to let either Heather or me out of her sight for long. The doorbell chimed, and I took a steadying breath before answering. This would be Heather's first time inside my new home, a deliberate neutral territory that was neither her mansion nor my modest apartment, but something created specifically for this new chapter in all our lives. "Grandma, I got an A on my science project," Abigail announced as she burst through the door, waving a paper with a prominent red mark at the top. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I praised, accepting her enthusiastic hug while meeting Heather's eyes over her head. "Why don't you and William get settled in your rooms? I made banana bread this afternoon. It's cooling in the kitchen." This was our usual routine. The children would decompress from the transition by spending time in their rooms, spaces I had carefully created to be both familiar and new, with treasured items from both households. It gave them a sense of control and ownership during a time when so much in their lives felt dictated by adult decisions. "May I come in?" Heather asked once they had disappeared up the stairs, her tone just formal enough to acknowledge the awkwardness of our situation. "Of course." I stepped aside, noticing with mild surprise that she had changed since our phone conversation, her corporate attire replaced by more casual slacks and a sweater, though still elegant in that effortless way she had. Her gaze swept the entryway and living room beyond, taking in the traditional furnishings, the built-in bookshelves already filled with my extensive collection, the framed family photographs that created visual anchors of continuity for the children. "You've settled in quickly," she observed, her tone neutral but her eyes registering every detail. "The children seem comfortable here. They've been helping with decisions," I explained, leading her toward the kitchen where a pot of tea was brewing. William chose the paint colors for the family room, and Abigail selected the garden plants. It gives them a sense of investment in the space. I poured tea into 2 cups, noting with private amusement that we had unconsciously assumed our positions on opposite sides of the kitchen island, maintaining physical distance while engaging in this cautious dialogue. "About the company," Heather began, cupping her hands around the warm mug. "I meant what I said. I want a formal role." "Why now?" I asked directly. "You've never shown interest in the business operations before." A flash of irritation crossed her face. "Because I didn't need to before. Nathan handled that part of our lives. I focused on the social aspects, the relationships, the image we presented to the world." She took a careful sip of tea. "But things have changed. I need to protect my interests, financial and otherwise. And what exactly would this role entail?" I kept my tone conversational, though wariness churned beneath the surface. Every interaction with Heather felt like a chess match, moves and counter-moves with stakes higher than mere victory. A board seat, as I mentioned, input on major decisions, access to the same information and briefings you receive. She met my gaze directly. And acknowledgement of my connection to the company's history and future. I considered her request, turning it over in my mind like a complex equation seeking balance. Instinct warned against giving Heather any additional power or influence, yet I couldn't deny the potential strategic value of aligning our interests rather than perpetuating antagonism. "What would you bring to these roles?" I asked finally. "Beyond your status as Nathan's widow?" The question might have offended her once, but something had shifted in Heather since the will reading, a new pragmatism replacing her previous sense of entitlement. "Connections," she replied without hesitation. "I know every major player in the tech industry socially, their spouses, their children, their personal interests and vulnerabilities. I've attended every charity gala, every foundation dinner, every exclusive retreat for the past decade." She leaned forward slightly. "Information that never appears in business profiles or corporate briefings. The human element that can make or break partnerships." It was a surprisingly candid assessment of her strengths, and one I couldn't easily dismiss. While I had been educating myself on balance sheets and product development timelines, the relationship aspects of the business remained a mystery to me. "There's something else you should know," she continued when I didn't immediately respond. "The Phoenix platform issues are worse than what was presented at today's meeting." This caught my attention. "Explain." Nathan was concerned about the neural network architecture for months before his death. He was working nights, weekends, canceling family plans to address problems he wouldn't fully explain to me. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup, a rare gesture of uncertainty from someone typically so controlled. 2 weeks before he died, I found him in his home office at 3 a.m., surrounded by technical papers and looking frightened. Frightened, I echoed, trying to reconcile this description with my confident, capable son. That's the only word for it, she confirmed. When I asked what was wrong, he said, "The system is developing unexpected patterns, connections I can't explain." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "Judith, I think there was something about Phoenix that scared him, something beyond routine technical challenges. The revelation hung between us, unsettling in its implications. If Nathan had been truly worried about the platform's development, why hadn't he shared those concerns with his executive team? Or with me? Have you mentioned this to anyone else?" I asked, mind racing with possibilities. She shook her head. Who would I tell? The board members who just got fired? The development team that reports to them? A hint of her old sharpness returned. Besides, it was a private conversation between husband and wife. I wasn't even sure if I should tell you. Why are you telling me now? Because despite everything between us, I know you loved Nathan, and I know you want to protect his legacy. She set down her cup with deliberate care. The changes you made today at the company were necessary. I wouldn't have approached it the same way, but your instincts were right. The admission, so unexpected from a woman who had fought me at every turn, left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, footsteps thundered down the stairs, and William appeared in the doorway. "Mom, Grandma, come quick. There's something wrong with Abby." We both moved instantly, maternal instinct overriding any lingering tension. Upstairs, we found Abigail sitting on her bed, face pale, breathing in short, rapid gasps. "Panic attack," Heather diagnosed immediately, kneeling before her daughter. "Abby, look at me. Focus on my voice." I sat beside her on the bed, one hand rubbing gentle circles on her small back, while Heather guided her through breathing exercises with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, Abigail's breathing slowed, color returning to her cheeks. "I dreamed about Daddy," she whispered, tears spilling down her face. "He was trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't hear him." Heather and I exchanged glances over her head, momentarily united in our concern for this child who carried grief too heavy for her small shoulders. "It's all right, sweetheart," I soothed. "Dreams can feel very real, but they're just our minds trying to process our feelings." "Your father loved you very much," Heather added, smoothing Abigail's tangled curls. "Sometimes our hearts miss people so much that they appear in our dreams." The tenderness in her voice, a genuine maternal warmth I had witnessed too rarely, reminded me that despite our differences, Heather loved these children. Whatever calculation and ambition drove her other actions, her devotion to William and Abigail was real. Later, after the children had settled down with books and the promised banana bread, Heather and I retreated to my study to continue our interrupted conversation. "She's had 3 attacks this week," Heather admitted, sinking into a chair with uncharacteristic weariness. "The school counselor says it's normal grief response, but it's heartbreaking to witness," I finished for her. She nodded, a moment of perfect understanding passing between us, the shared pain of watching Nathan's children struggle with his absence. "About your proposal," I said, returning to our earlier discussion. "I'll support your appointment to the board on one condition, which is, we present a united front regarding the children. No more subtle undermining, no more competing for their affection or loyalty. They need both of us strong and working together, especially now." Heather studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she extended her hand across the desk that had once been Nathan's, a gesture both formal and surprisingly genuine. "Agreed," she said simply. As we shook hands, I recognized that this wasn't friendship or even trust, merely a pragmatic alliance born of necessity and shared purpose. But for 2 women who had begun as adversaries, perhaps it was enough to forge a path forward, for Nathan's children, for his company, and for the complex future that bound us together, whether we wished it or not. 6 weeks after our tentative alliance began, I sat in Nathan's home office, a room Heather had left untouched since his death, preserved like a museum exhibit to a life interrupted. The mahogany desk was still arranged with mathematical precision, laptop centered, notepads stacked at precise angles, pens aligned in a leather holder. Even the chair remained positioned exactly as he had left it that final evening before heading to the late meeting from which he would never return. "This feels intrusive," I admitted to Heather, who stood by the window, arms crossed defensively across her chest, like reading someone's diary. "It's necessary," she replied, though her rigid posture suggested she found this invasion of Nathan's private space equally uncomfortable. "If there's anything in his personal files about the Phoenix platform concerns, we need to find it before the technical review next week." Our unlikely partnership had evolved over the past month into something approaching functional, if not exactly warm. Heather had taken her seat on the board with surprising effectiveness, her social intelligence complementing my more analytical approach. Together, we had begun untangling the complex web of issues facing Wilson Tech, most critically, the troubling questions surrounding the Phoenix platform. Dr. Sharma's comprehensive technical review had confirmed Heather's suspicions. The AI system was exhibiting unexpected behaviors that couldn't be explained by its programming. Most concerning were pattern recognition anomalies that appeared to learn faster than the algorithms should allow, creating connections across datasets that had never been explicitly linked. "Nathan kept most of his work on the secure company servers," Heather continued, "but he sometimes made notes on his personal laptop, especially in the last few months, things he didn't want the team to see until he was certain." I nodded, powering on the laptop that had remained closed since Nathan's death. The screen illuminated, requesting a password. Heather leaned over my shoulder to enter it. Abigail William Zodem 715. The children's names combined with their birth month and day. "He changed it 3 months before he died," she explained. "It used to be our anniversary date." The small detail, this digital evidence of Nathan's shifting priorities, hung between us for a moment. Another reminder of the fractures in their marriage that neither of us had fully acknowledged. The desktop appeared, organized with the same methodical precision as his physical workspace, folders labeled by project, by year, by category. Nothing immediately stood out as unusual or concerning. "Try his personal email," Heather suggested. He sometimes sent himself notes or links when he was working on something away from his desk. The email application opened to reveal hundreds of unread messages, condolences, business inquiries, automated notifications that had accumulated since his death. I scrolled carefully through the sent folder, searching for anything Nathan might have documented about his concerns. "There," Heather pointed. "That one to Dr. Sharma, sent at 2:17 a.m. 3 days before he died." The subject line read simply, "Anomalous Patterns, Confidential." I clicked to open it, scanning the brief message. Anita, attaching the logs from last night's regression testing. The pattern emergence in dataset C isn't following expected parameters. System is creating correlations between the medical diagnostic inputs and the educational assessment frameworks that were never part of the training model. More concerning, when I isolated the neural pathway clusters responsible, I found activity signatures that don't match our architectural design. It's as if the system is developing processing methods beyond its programming. I've taken the test environment offline until we can determine whether this represents a fundamental flaw or something more interesting. Please review privately before our next team meeting. NW. Medical diagnostic inputs? I questioned, turning to Heather. Phoenix is an educational technology platform. Why would it be processing medical data? Heather's brow furrowed. I don't know. Nathan never mentioned anything medical in connection with Phoenix. We continued searching, methodically working through email folders, document directories, even browser history. An hour passed, then 2, with only fragments of information that hinted at Nathan's growing concern, but revealed little about its specific nature. Then, in a folder labeled simply Personal, we found a subfolder titled Contingencies. That's odd, Heather murmured. Nathan wasn't one for euphemisms. Inside were several documents with recent timestamps, all within the last 3 months of his life. The first, titled Symptoms.log, contained dated entries that sent a chill through me as I read. March 12th, second instance of momentary aphasia during board presentation. Couldn't recall the term neural network for approximately 15 seconds. March 28th, brief but intense headache, right temple, accompanied by visual disturbance, shimmering in peripheral vision. Duration, 7 minutes. April 10th, 3 episodes of deja vu within 24 hours, more pronounced than typical experience. April 17th, momentary loss of coordination while typing. Fingers seem to forget familiar movement patterns. April 29th, memory lapse during dinner. Couldn't recall Abigail's piano recital piece, despite attending performance the previous day. May 5th, headache pattern establishing. Right-sided, pulsating, preceded by visual disturbances. Increasing frequency, now 2-3x weekly. The log continued with similar entries, documenting with clinical precision the subtle deterioration of Nathan's neurological function over a 3-month period. The final entry, dated just 5 days before his death, read simply, "Diagnosis confirmed privately with Dr. Larson. Prognosis as expected. Timeline uncertain but abbreviated. Arrangements in progress." He knew, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He knew he was dying. Heather had gone very still beside me, her face drained of color. "That's not possible. He would have told me. He would have sought treatment, specialists." "Maybe he did," I said gently, opening the next document in the folder, a PDF labeled Medical Consultation, Larson. The report confirmed our worst fears. Nathan had been diagnosed with a progressive cerebral aneurysm, a congenital weakness in an arterial wall that had begun to deteriorate rapidly. Dr. Larson, a neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, had outlined treatment options, all carrying significant risks and uncertain outcomes. The prognosis was grim. Without intervention, rupture was inevitable within months. With intervention, the location and complexity of the aneurysm made successful treatment unlikely. Nathan had been living with a death sentence, carrying the knowledge alone. "Why wouldn't he tell us?" Heather's voice cracked, her composure finally breaking. "Why face this by himself?" I had no answer that could ease the pain of this discovery, this evidence that my son, always self-sufficient, always protective of others' feelings, had chosen to shoulder his mortality alone rather than burden those he loved. The next document provided a partial explanation, titled Final Arrangements. It contained meticulous instructions for everything from funeral preferences to financial provisions. One paragraph stood out starkly. "I've chosen not to pursue surgical intervention for reasons both personal and practical. The probability of successful treatment is low, and the likelihood of cognitive impairment from either the procedure or the continued expansion of the aneurysm is high. I prefer to use my remaining time with full cognitive function rather than risk becoming a diminished version of myself that my children would have to witness. This is not surrender, but a conscious choice to embrace quality over quantity in whatever time remains." Tears blurred my vision as I recognized the pragmatic courage so characteristic of Nathan, facing death not with desperation, but with the same methodical problem-solving he had applied to every challenge in his life. The final document in the folder bore the title Phoenix Connection and opened to reveal a research summary unlike anything I had expected. The correlation between my neurological symptoms and the anomalous pattern development in Phoenix cannot be coincidental. As the system's primary architect, my cognitive patterns are inevitably embedded in its design architecture. The emergent behaviors appeared within weeks of my first symptoms, suggesting a potential connection between the neural degradation in my brain and the unexpected neural pathway development in the AI system. Hypothesis: Phoenix may be detecting subtle cognitive changes through our interaction interface, essentially diagnosing the early stages of my condition before conventional symptoms became apparent. If proven, this could represent a breakthrough in early detection of cerebrovascular abnormalities. I've redirected a portion of Phoenix's development to explore this possibility, creating a diagnostic module that processes linguistic patterns, microhesitations, and cognitive processing markers against baseline data. Preliminary results are promising but insufficient for clinical application without further development and testing. Time is the critical factor I no longer have. Heather and I sat in stunned silence, the implications of Nathan's private research dawning on us both. He hadn't just been working on an educational platform. He had been racing against his own mortality to transform Phoenix into a diagnostic tool that might save others from his fate. "That's why he changed his will," Heather said finally, her voice hollow with realization. "He knew he was dying, so he made arrangements to protect everyone. The children, you, even the company, and the Phoenix platform," I added, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. He knew its potential went far beyond educational applications. He was trying to create something that could detect neurological conditions before traditional symptoms appeared. The weight of this discovery, this final brilliant act of a dying man, settled over us like a physical presence. Nathan had transformed his own tragedy into an opportunity for innovation, working literally until his last days to create something that might spare others what he could not escape himself. "We have to continue his work," I said, the words emerging with surprising conviction. "Not just preserve what he built, but fulfill what he intended to create." For once, Heather didn't argue or calculate advantage. She simply nodded, tears tracking silently down her perfect face as she reached for my hand across the desk that had witnessed Nathan's final intellectual battle. "Together," she agreed quietly. In that moment of shared grief and purpose, something fundamental shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, but a deeper understanding. We had both loved Nathan in our different ways. Now we shared the responsibility of completing what death had interrupted, not just for his memory, but for the potential to save countless lives with the technology he had envisioned in his final days. Winter descended on Connecticut with unusual ferocity, blanketing the landscape in pristine white that belied the intensity of activity within the walls of Wilson Tech Solutions. 3 months after discovering Nathan's private research, the company had undergone a transformation almost as dramatic as the seasonal change outside. The preliminary clinical trials show a 78% accuracy rate in detecting early-stage cerebrovascular abnormalities, Dr. Sharma reported, her typically reserved demeanor brightened by cautious excitement. That's substantially higher than conventional screening methods, particularly for patients under 50, who wouldn't normally be flagged for testing. We sat in the newly renovated conference room. Heather, Dr. Sharma, myself, and the specialized team we had assembled to continue Nathan's work. What had begun as a private mission shared between unlikely allies had evolved into Phoenix Medical, a separate division of Wilson Tech dedicated to developing the diagnostic applications Nathan had envisioned in his final months. "The FDA fast-track application looks promising," added Dr. Marcus Greenfield, the neurologist we had recruited from Johns Hopkins to oversee the medical validation process. "They're particularly interested in the non-invasive nature of the technology. If the expanded trials confirm these results, we could be looking at regulatory approval within 18 months rather than the typical 3 to 5 years. I glanced at Heather, who sat beside me taking meticulous notes on her tablet. Our working relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted in those first bitter days after Nathan's death. Not friendship exactly, too much history and fundamental difference in temperament prevented that, but a partnership founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. "What about the privacy concerns?" Heather asked, ever attuned to the potential public relations challenges. "The system essentially analyzes behavioral and cognitive patterns without explicit awareness from the subject. The ethics committee raised valid questions about informed consent. This was Heather's particular strength, anticipating the human elements that might complicate or derail technical achievements. Where I focused on educational applications and organizational structure, she navigated the complex social and ethical landscapes with surprising nuance. "We've revised the consent protocols to address those concerns," Dr. Greenfield assured her. "Users will now receive explicit disclosure about the diagnostic monitoring components, with opt-in rather than opt-out provisions." As the meeting continued with detailed technical discussions, I found my thoughts drifting to Nathan, how astonished and pleased he would be to see his final project not only continuing, but accelerating beyond his initial vision. The educational platform remained in development, but with adjusted timelines that acknowledged the genuine technical challenges rather than forcing premature release to meet market pressures. Most surprisingly, the company's stock had stabilized after an initial drop following our public disclosures about Phoenix's redirection. Transparency, it seemed, had earned more investor confidence than the previous administration's obfuscation. After the meeting concluded, Heather and I walked together toward the parking garage, our breath forming small clouds in the frigid air of the underground structure. "William's birthday party is Saturday," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. "He's asking if we could do it at your house instead of mine." Apparently, your backyard sledding hill is superior terrain for the snow fort competition he's planning. I smiled at the precise quotation of William's formal phrasing, so like Nathan in his methodical approach to even childhood pleasures. Of course, I'd be happy to host. That means I'll handle Abigail's party in the spring, she continued. The quick calculation typical of how we now approached shared parenting responsibilities. A careful balance sheet of time, effort, and occasions that ensured neither child felt the weight of adult tensions. We had reached our respective cars, her sleek Mercedes and my more practical SUV, vehicles that reflected our different approaches to life as aptly as anything could. "There's something else," Heather said, her hand resting on her car door but making no move to open it. "Dr. Larson called this morning. He's reviewed Nathan's medical records and our research data. He believes Phoenix might have detected Nathan's aneurysm up to 6 months before conventional symptoms appeared." The information hit me with physical force. The confirmation that Nathan's self-diagnosis had been correct, that the technology he developed in his final months might indeed have saved him had it existed earlier. 6 months, I echoed, the implications staggering. "Enough time for preventative treatment. Enough time to change everything," Heather agreed, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "He was right, Judith, about all of it." We stood in silence, sharing the bittersweet knowledge that our current success was built on a foundation of personal tragedy that could have been prevented by the very technology we were now developing. "He'd be proud of you," I said finally, "of how you've championed this project, navigated the ethical complexities." Surprise flickered across her features at the unexpected praise. "I've simply done what needed doing." "No," I corrected gently. "You've done more than that. You've honored his vision in ways I couldn't have managed alone. The children see it too." Something vulnerable passed across her face, a brief glimpse beneath the composed exterior she maintained even now. "Sometimes I wonder if they'll ever forgive me for how I behaved after he died, for trying to separate them from you." It was the nearest she had come to a direct apology for those dark days following the funeral, the cruel dismissal, the plans to take the children to California, the attempt to erase me from their lives. "Children are remarkably adaptable," I offered. "They respond to what is, not what was. You're a good mother, Heather, different from me in almost every way, but no less devoted." She nodded once, briskly, as if accepting a business assessment rather than personal reassurance. But the slight relaxation in her shoulders told me the words had mattered. "Saturday at 2 then," she confirmed, opening her car door. "I'll bring the cake and decorations, and I'll handle the snow fort construction supervision," I added with a smile. As I drove home through the snow-covered streets, I reflected on how thoroughly my life had transformed in the 5 months since Nathan's death. The modest apartment where I had lived contentedly for decades now belonged to someone else. My daily routine of reading, gardening, and occasional substitute teaching had been replaced by board meetings, technical briefings, and shared custody arrangements. Most profoundly, the quiet, supportive role I had occupied in Nathan's life, proud mother watching from the sidelines, had given way to active stewardship of his most important legacies, his children and his final innovation. At home, I found William and Abigail already settled in their rooms, having been dropped off by Mrs. Peterson after their after-school activities. Our arrangement had evolved into a comfortable rhythm, 3 days with Heather, 3 with me, and Sundays spent together as a family unit. Awkward at first, but gradually becoming natural as the children's needs superseded adult discomforts. "Grandma, can you help me with this math problem?" William called from the kitchen table where he had spread his homework. "It's about probability distributions, and the textbook explanation doesn't make sense." I joined him, examining the problem with interest. William had inherited Nathan's mathematical aptitude along with his thoughtful demeanor. At 10, he was already working 2 grade levels ahead in math and science, though his teachers noted he sometimes struggled with the creative writing assignments that required emotional exploration rather than logical analysis. "The trick is to visualize the distribution curve," I explained, sketching a quick graph on his notebook margin. "See how the values cluster around the mean?" As we worked through the problem set, Abigail wandered in from the family room where she'd been reading, climbing onto a stool across from us. "Dad was good at math too, wasn't he?" she asked, her small face solemn with the effort of accessing memories that were already fading at her young age. "The best," William confirmed before I could answer. He could do calculations in his head faster than a computer. Not quite, I corrected gently, but he did have a remarkable mind for patterns and relationships. That's what made him so good at designing complex systems like Phoenix. Is that why you and Mom are working on his special project? Abigail asked, revealing more awareness of our activities than I had realized. To finish what he started? The question, so direct, so perceptive, caught me off guard. Heather and I had been careful to shield the children from the specifics of Nathan's medical condition and his private research, feeling they were too young to process the knowledge that their father had known he was dying. In a way, I acknowledged carefully, your father had big dreams for how his technology could help people. We want to make sure those dreams come true. Abigail nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. I think he visits me sometimes, she confided, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Not like a ghost or anything, but sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I can almost hear him telling me everything will be okay. William rolled his eyes with brotherly skepticism, but I saw the flash of longing beneath his dismissive gesture, the wish that he too might experience such comforting visitations. I think people we love stay with us in all sorts of ways, I offered, choosing my words with care. In memories, in the things they taught us, in the parts of ourselves that remind us of them. As the children returned to their respective activities, I found myself standing before the family photo wall I had created in the living room, a visual timeline of Nathan's life from infancy through adulthood. His gap-toothed elementary school smile, his serious expression on his college graduation day, his proud stance beside Heather on their wedding day, his gentle handling of newborn William, then Abigail. A life cut short, yet somehow continuing through his children, through the company he built, through the final innovation that might save others from his fate. Not immortality, perhaps, but a legacy that extended far beyond the brief span of his 42 years. We're doing our best, I whispered to his smiling image, all of us in our own ways, and somewhere in the quiet house, I could almost imagine I heard his voice in response. I know, Mom, I know. 1 year to the day after Nathan's death, snow fell in gentle swirls outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Wilson Tech's main auditorium. The space was filled to capacity. Employees, industry partners, medical professionals, and family members gathered for the official launch of Phoenix Medical, now rebranded as Nathan's Beacon, in honor of its creator and inspiration. I stood slightly off stage, watching as Heather delivered the opening address with the polished confidence that had once intimidated me, but now earned my genuine respect. She had transformed over the past year, channeling her formidable social intelligence and ambition into shepherding Nathan's final project through the complex worlds of medical regulation, ethical oversight, and public perception. 1 year ago today, she was saying, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the anniversary. We lost not only a brilliant innovator, but a visionary who understood that technology's highest purpose is to serve humanity's deepest needs. What began as an educational platform designed to adapt to individual learning patterns evolved, in Nathan's final months, into something far more profound, a system capable of detecting subtle neurological changes that precede conventional symptoms of potentially fatal conditions. From my vantage point, I could see William and Abigail seated in the front row, both solemn in their dark, formal attire, yet visibly proud as they listened to their mother speak about their father's legacy. At 11 and 8, they had weathered a year of profound loss and adjustment with remarkable resilience, adapting to their shared custody arrangement and the public attention that increasingly surrounded their father's final innovation. Today, we are honored to announce that Nathan's Beacon has received conditional FDA approval for clinical implementation in 50 major medical centers across the country, Heather continued, gesturing toward Dr. Greenfield and the medical advisory board seated behind her. Early detection of cerebrovascular abnormalities could save thousands of lives annually and prevent the devastating consequences of stroke and aneurysm rupture that too many families have endured. As she spoke, I reflected on our improbable journey from bitter adversaries to functional partners. The transformation hadn't been easy or linear. We had navigated setbacks, disagreements, and the occasional resurgence of old tensions. Yet the shared commitment to Nathan's vision and to the well-being of his children had provided a foundation solid enough to withstand these challenges. I would now like to invite Judith Wilson, Nathan's mother and the co-director of the Nathan's Beacon Initiative, to share the educational applications that will make this technology accessible beyond clinical settings. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the stage, accepting the microphone with a nod of thanks. Public speaking had never been my strength. 30 years teaching high school English had accustomed me to classrooms, not auditoriums. But this moment demanded my voice, not just my behind-the-scenes guidance. When my son was a little boy, I began, deliberately eschewing the formal speech I had prepared. He once asked me why people couldn't solve problems before they became problems. By the time we notice something's wrong, he said, it's already a big mess. Why can't we catch it when it's just a little mess? A gentle ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the audience. That childish wisdom evolved into the man who, even facing his own mortality, sought to create a system that could detect little messes before they became irreversible tragedies. The clinical applications Dr. Greenfield and his team have developed are just the beginning. I outlined the educational initiative we had developed alongside the medical applications, a simplified version of Nathan's Beacon that could be implemented in schools, community centers, and public libraries, designed to identify early indicators of learning disabilities, processing disorders, and potential neurological concerns that often went undetected until they significantly impacted a child's development. Nathan believed that technology should adapt to human needs, not force humans to adapt to technological limitations, I concluded. Today, we honor that belief by making this technology available not just to specialists in advanced medical facilities, but to teachers, librarians, and community health workers who often serve as the first line of observation for children's developmental well-being. As I returned to my seat beside Heather, she leaned over slightly. He would have loved that childhood anecdote, she whispered. I never heard that story before. There are many stories I haven't shared yet, I replied quietly. Perhaps it's time the children heard more of them. The rest of the ceremony proceeded with technical demonstrations, testimonials from early trial participants, and the formal ribbon cutting that symbolized the launch of Nathan's Beacon into the world beyond Wilson Tech's development labs. Throughout it all, I found my attention repeatedly drawn to William and Abigail, to their proud posture when their father was mentioned, to their quiet dignity in the face of so many strangers discussing the man they had lost. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled during the reception, I found myself standing beside the memorial portrait of Nathan that had been unveiled as part of the event, a striking image captured at the height of his success, his expression thoughtful, yet determined, so characteristic of how he had approached every challenge in his life. He looks so young, came a voice beside me. I turned to find Benjamin, who had flown in specifically for the ceremony. It's still hard to believe he's gone. Yes, I agreed, studying the familiar features of my only child, forever preserved in this moment of vitality. Though in some ways, it feels like he's more present than ever. Benjamin nodded, understanding what I meant without need for elaboration. Nathan's influence permeated everything now: the company's direction, the technological innovation bearing his name, the co-parenting arrangement that had emerged from the chaos of his death. How are you really doing, Judith? He asked, his concern genuine. This past year has been extraordinary by any measure. I considered the question carefully, looking across the room to where Heather stood with the children, one arm casually draped around William's shoulders as they spoke with Dr. Sharma. The tableau would have been unimaginable a year ago, this functional family unit forged from tragedy and initial animosity. I'm not who I was, I said finally. Grief changes you. Responsibility changes you. But I think Nathan would approve of who I'm becoming. He would be bursting with pride, Benjamin assured me, his hand warm on my shoulder. You've honored him in the most meaningful way possible. Later that evening, after the formal events concluded, Heather surprised me by suggesting we take the children to Nathan's grave together, something we had never done as a unit, having navigated our initial grief in separate parallel tracks. The cemetery was peaceful under its blanket of fresh snow, the gathering darkness softened by the warm glow of the memorial lanterns that lined the paths. William and Abigail walked slightly ahead of us, their small forms silhouetted against the twilight sky, occasionally stopping to brush snow from the stone markers that caught their attention. "This is the first time I've been back since the funeral," Heather admitted quietly, as we followed at a respectful distance. I couldn't face it before. "It gets easier," I offered, drawing from my own experience of loss, first my husband, then my son. "Not better exactly, but less raw." She nodded, uncharacteristically vulnerable in this sacred space. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about us both loving Nathan in our different ways. You were right. I didn't love him the way you did, with that unconditional maternal devotion. But I did love him, in my way." The confession, for that's what it felt like, hung in the cold air between us. "I know," I said simply. We reached Nathan's grave, an elegant black granite marker that reflected the last glow of sunset. William and Abigail had already arrived, standing close together before it in solemn contemplation. "Hi, Dad," Abigail said softly, reaching out to trace the engraved letters of his name. "We launched your special project today. It's going to help lots of people." "The neural network architecture has been completely rebuilt," William added, as if providing a technical update to a temporarily absent father. "Dr. Sharma says it's even better than the original design. The innocent certainty that Nathan could somehow hear them, that he remained accessible despite death's finality, brought tears to my eyes. They were processing their loss in their own ways. Abigail through emotional connection, William through intellectual engagement with his father's work. Heather stepped forward, placing a single white rose on the snow-covered ground before the marker. "We're keeping our promises," she said simply. "All of them." I knew what she meant. The promises explicit in Nathan's will, and the implicit ones we had made to ourselves in the aftermath of his death. Promises to protect his children, to preserve his legacy, to continue the work he had begun. Promises that had transformed both Heather and me in ways neither could have anticipated. As twilight deepened into true darkness, the four of us stood together before Nathan's grave. Not the family unit he had envisioned during his life, perhaps, but a different kind of family nonetheless. One forged through loss and conflict, strengthened by common purpose, and ultimately defined not by conventional bonds, but by shared commitment to honoring a life that had touched us all. "It's getting cold," I said finally, noticing Abigail's small shiver despite her heavy coat. "We should head back. Can we stop for hot chocolate?" William asked, his usual reserve softening in the emotional moment. Dad always took us for hot chocolate after visiting Grandpa's grave. "Of course," Heather and I responded simultaneously, then exchanged a small smile at the unconscious synchronicity. As we walked back through the quiet cemetery, Abigail slipped her hand into mine while continuing to hold her mother's with the other, physically bridging the space between Heather and me. William walked slightly ahead, his posture and gait increasingly reminiscent of Nathan with each passing month. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that Nathan's true legacy wasn't the technological innovation bearing his name, remarkable though it was. His greatest achievement walked beside me. These children who carried his compassion, his intelligence, his determination to solve problems before they became insurmountable. And perhaps, in ensuring that Heather and I found a way to move beyond our initial enmity to create a functioning family structure for William and Abigail, Nathan had performed his most impressive feat of all, engineering hope from tragedy, connection from conflict, and renewal from profound loss. It wasn't the life any of us had imagined, but standing in the gentle snowfall, surrounded by the family we had become, I knew it was a life worth embracing, with all its complexity, its unexpected alliances, and its promise of continued growth from the seeds Nathan had planted.
Trước khi khép lại câu chuyện này, mình muốn bạn ở lại với mình thêm một chút, như một cuộc trò chuyện thực sự, không vội vàng, không kịch bản. Đôi khi mình nghĩ điều đặc biệt nhất của những câu chuyện như thế này không phải là cao trào, không phải là cái kết, mà là những cảm xúc còn đọng lại sau khi mọi thứ đã kết thúc. Bạn có bao giờ xem xong một câu chuyện rồi tự nhiên im lặng vài giây không? Không phải vì không có gì để nói, mà là vì có quá nhiều thứ đang chạy trong đầu. Mình thì có. Và mỗi lần như vậy mình lại tự hỏi ngoài kia có bao nhiêu câu chuyện giống như thế này mà chúng ta chưa từng được nghe. Bao nhiêu con người đã trải qua những điều khó khăn như vậy nhưng không có ai kể lại. Bao nhiêu người phụ nữ đã phải mạnh mẽ trong im lặng mà không ai thực sự nhìn thấy. Đó là điều khiến mình luôn suy nghĩ rất nhiều sau mỗi video. Bởi vì sự mạnh mẽ không phải lúc nào cũng ồn ào. Nó không phải lúc nào cũng là những khoảnh khắc đứng trên sân khấu hay những chiến thắng rõ ràng để mọi người vỗ tay. Đôi khi sự mạnh mẽ chỉ đơn giản là thức dậy vào mỗi buổi sáng khi bạn không còn chút năng lượng nào, tiếp tục cố gắng khi mọi thứ dường như đang chống đối lại bạn, mỉm cười dù bên trong bạn đang rất mệt mỏi. Và điều đặc biệt là rất nhiều người phụ nữ ngoài kia đang làm điều đó mỗi ngày. Không ai biết, không ai hỏi, nhưng họ vẫn tiếp tục. Những nhân vật trong câu chuyện bạn vừa xem có thể là hư cấu, nhưng cảm xúc của họ thì không hề hư cấu. Nỗi đau là sự thật, sự tổn thương là thật, và cả sự kiên cường cũng là thật. Đó là lý do tại sao mình luôn muốn kể những câu chuyện như thế này. Không phải để làm mọi thứ trở nên buồn hơn, mà để chúng ta có thể hiểu hơn, hiểu rằng đằng sau mỗi con người là cả một hành trình mà chúng ta không thể nhìn thấy. Hiểu rằng đôi khi sự im lặng của một người không phải là họ yếu đuối, mà là họ đã phải chịu đựng quá nhiều. Và hiểu rằng sự vươn lên không phải lúc nào cũng hoàn hảo. Có những lần họ sẽ gục ngã, có những lúc họ sẽ nghi ngờ chính mình, có những khoảnh khắc họ muốn từ bỏ tất cả. Nhưng rồi họ vẫn đứng dậy, không phải vì họ không sợ, mà là vì họ không còn lựa chọn nào khác ngoài việc phải tiếp tục. Và mình nghĩ đó mới là định nghĩa thực sự của sức mạnh. Không phải là không bao giờ yếu đuối, mà là vẫn bước tiếp, ngay cả khi bạn đang yếu đuối nhất. Có thể khi nghe đến đây, bạn sẽ thấy câu chuyện này không chỉ là về một nhân vật nữa, mà là về rất nhiều con người. Có thể là một người bạn của bạn, một người thân trong gia đình, hoặc thậm chí là chính bạn. Và nếu bạn từng trải qua những cảm xúc tương tự, thì mình muốn bạn biết một điều: bạn không hề đơn độc. Có thể câu chuyện của bạn chưa được kể, có thể không ai thực sự hiểu hết những gì bạn đã đi qua, nhưng điều đó không làm cho những gì bạn trải qua trở nên ít quan trọng hơn. Ngược lại, nó càng cho thấy bạn đã mạnh mẽ như thế nào để đi đến đây. Và đó cũng là lý do mình luôn hy vọng khi bạn xem được những video này, bạn không chỉ xem để giải trí, mà bạn sẽ cảm nhận, bạn sẽ dừng lại một chút để nghĩ, để nhìn mọi thứ chậm lại, để hiểu hơn về con người và về chính mình. Bởi vì đôi khi một câu chuyện có thể không thay đổi cả thế giới, nhưng nó có thể thay đổi cách bạn nhìn nhận về thế giới. Và như thế đã là rất đủ rồi. Nếu bạn đã đi cùng mình đến tận đây, thật sự mình rất trân trọng điều đó. Không phải ai cũng có đủ kiên nhẫn để lắng nghe đến tận giây phút cuối cùng. Và việc bạn vẫn ở đây có nghĩa là câu chuyện này đã chạm đến bạn, dù chỉ một chút. Nếu bạn muốn, bạn có thể tiếp tục đồng hành cùng mình trong những video tiếp theo. Vẫn sẽ là những câu chuyện như thế này. Những câu chuyện có thể sẽ khiến bạn suy nghĩ nhiều hơn, có thể khiến bạn cảm thấy nặng lòng, nhưng cũng có thể mang lại cho bạn một góc nhìn khác. Và trước khi kết thúc, mình chỉ muốn nói một điều thôi. Đôi khi cuộc sống sẽ không công bằng, đôi khi mọi thứ sẽ xảy ra theo cách mà bạn không thể kiểm soát. Nhưng điều bạn luôn có thể kiểm soát là việc bạn chọn đứng dậy như thế nào sau tất cả. Dù chậm cũng được, dù mệt cũng được, chỉ cần bạn vẫn bước tiếp thì bạn đã mạnh mẽ hơn bạn nghĩ rất nhiều rồi. Cảm ơn vì các bạn đã ở đây, đã lắng nghe và đã cùng mình đi qua những câu chuyện này. Hẹn gặp lại các bạn trong những câu chuyện tiếp theo. Bye!